that I realized a lot of what I believed was wrong, and that opened me up to new ideas in terms of how to be a father and how well I wasn't a father at the time, but again, juxtaposing how I was raised and who my father was in my household versus what the Bible says a father should be, versus
Right.
what the Bible says a mother should be, versus what the Bible says, how children should be raised. And
Hmm.
so I made the conscious decision to choose the Bible standard over the standard that I grew up under. And I feel that for a lot of Christians, they can't quite make that disconnect. They insist upon going about, so they are traditionalists in that sense, continuing on or maintaining the standard that they grew up under. And when it comes to the Bible, they don't really take heed to it because they feel in a way that it's kind of archaic and it's kind of antiquated. Some of
Yeah.
its wisdom, or they believe that it's not really practical to today in terms of how one ought to raise their children. When I look at the Bible, I see more evidence of discipleship than I do for quote unquote education, at least education in the modern sense of the word. I have Jambalaya talks here as well. I'm not seeing her on camera, but I'm going to bring her up anyway. But go ahead and respond to that, Keisha.
Yeah. So, I think because, like you said, because we've gone more secular, in addition to going more secular, we don't know the origins of America and how we used to do education. And you're right, education and schooling, two totally different things. And certainly schooling and discipleship, complete, even
Mhm.
more of a different thing. And so, because we've been brought up and we think it's traditional to have mass compulsory schooling, we think that that's normal for America, when in fact it's relatively new to Americans, and it's failing. It was known that it was been failing within the first decade that it was put to the masses, put out across the nation. And when I said mass exodus, we needed a mass exodus from the public school system. And I was surprised by the pushback that I seem to always be surprised. Like, I just, God will lay something on my heart and it will just make so much sense to me. And sometimes I'll research things. Sometimes I just kind of go with instinct. And that was purely like a God thing, just laid it on my heart, because I'm like, okay, the government is coming after your kids. Da, da, da. But anyway, when I said this, and I was really surprised by the pushback, the more I started to learn about the importing of the American public school system from Prussia,
Mhm.
it really opened my eyes to why we have become romanticized with this idea of we need public schools. They're just, we have to have them. And all the other things that come with that, thinking that it's just this great and wonderful institution, when if you look at the history of it, it has declined and made kids really stupid, thus making adults really stupid. um for a very, very long time. I forget exactly when it was put out across the nation, and made it mandatory that
Mhm.
you had to go through this institution. And it's so intertwined in so many different areas now: transportation,
Yeah.
clothing, food services. There is so much money that is in this institution now. You'll hear people say, "Oh no, we have to fight for the public schools." They're not really thinking about your child and their education. They're thinking about the money that has been pumped into these schooling. I call them indoctrination camps, because you can see by the numbers the children aren't learning. But
Mhm.
sorry, I kind of went all over the place on that one. But
No, take your time. Take your time. Everything you said was uh, pertinent to the conversation. What you say about the fact that you now have this whole infrastructure built up in and around the public school system is so true. And not only that, there's emotions tied to it as well. I, for one, have a sister-in-law who the last time I saw her, um, I the last time I saw her, I asked her how things were going, and she's a third or fourth grade teacher, and she said everything's going fine, or whatever. And it's like, how's work? Just making small talk. And she goes, well, it's a struggle. We don't have enough support as educators, but we're managing. So it's like there's emotions tied to it. Obviously, any person who reacts based upon raw emotion would be compelled to sympathize with the situation and resolve that things more need to be done about supporting our quote unquote public school educators, be it give them raises, be it give them more support, moral support, as a society, as a community, this, that, and the third. And for me, of course, being the radical I am, I believe that the public school system should be nuked. I believe that it should be completely destroyed, and that people should be left to educate their children in the way that they see fit in the private sector. I don't believe in centralized education, and this notion, like, yes, to an extent, I do agree that a school should have community support, but that support should be, again, based on their own volition from something they've created, not so much something that is this top down thing that we are now, under, if that makes sense. I wanted to bring Ebony, Joseph, into the conversation, otherwise known as Jambalaya Talks. I don't know how much of the conversation you've heard, Ebony, but feel free to share your thoughts. She gone. Did you want to respond to that before we get into the meat of the conversation?
Yeah, I think that when we are talking about, I would love to see to go back to parents, or parents educating their children, or children being educated in small groups in their community. I would love to see that. That's how my children are being educated right now. Now we call it a homeschool co-op. That's what it's called. But it has been the best thing for my children, and the children that I see there, they are thriving. I mean, it's so incredible. And people will say, even people have a problem with the idea of school choice, because what they'll say is that's just going to be more government, because you're still using, you're still allowing taxpayer dollars to, even though it's following the child, to go into these different places. I get the argument, and they're saying they will thereby have more power. I get the argument, but here's what I say to that: the longer you have kids, because you have to think about the opposite of that. The opposite of that is doing nothing, because you're not going to have this. You're not going to have 85% of kids be homeschooled tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So if the more we can get kids into, this is how I see it, at least, the more we can get kids into private with an eye on them, because we all know that private isn't perfect, into homeschooling, into alternative education, okay, those kids will be smarter. Those kids will be able to look at the world differently. When they become leaders, now they can look back and say, they can start chipping away at that public schooling system. Mm-hmm. And I see, I guess I am an incrementalist. I see it more as an incremental thing that we can slowly start to do. Those kids that are being, this mass exodus that we had, millions of kids that have gone into being public schooled, they grow up. Many of us, not all of us, but many of us are more in line with traditional ideas and thinking. Mm. Those kids will lead their children into those ideas, and they will become the leaders and the legislators who can start to chip away more at this this behemoth of this public and these public indoctrination camps. And so I think that's a good thing, because it's not going to be, otherwise they just stay stuck in the public school system, where we're fighting, trying to make a system work right that wasn't intended. It's not broken. If we want to tell the truth, the public school system is not broken. It's literally functioning the way that it was created to function. Yeah. I hate to tell you that, You know,
Yeah,
I hate
Dr.
it. You
Dr.
know,
Bodhi,
people don't like to hear it, huh?
yeah, Dr. Bodhi Bakum and Virgil Walker both make that same exact point that it's doing exactly what it was intended to do. I
It
mean, it's not, and that's the thing. Is like there's a lot of Republicans or conservatives or even Christians who believe that well, there were some missteps along the way, and all we must do now is reform the system, and it will get better. And the fact of the matter is, like, no, it won't. On the one hand, but two, the fact that you believe that plays into the degradation of it, all the more because you'll have people that come to the table, as it were, with the intention or as with the perceived intention of making it better, who are on the quote unquote other side, and it makes it look like things are being done because they're placating you, knowing all along that they're going to get their way, and their way is going to cost more money. It's going to basically, when people perceive, those of us who are, who share our sentiments, when people perceive that steps are being made, they keep their children in the system all the more. They prolong the situation only for it to have the same repetitive results that it has had for well over a century. And so for
actually,
me, it's like, I'm not going to sit there and be placated and keep my children, because you made this point, I think, in the last live, that you only have a very small amount of time to educate your
mhm,
children.
mhm.
And so all this time you're sitting there naive, thinking that the system is going to be reformed. Your kids are going to be graduation age and it's going to already be too late. And so for me, I think one must make the conscious decision to pull their children out of a broken system
Yeah.
instead of trying to reform it whilst your
Mhm.
children are in the system being, what I mean? It just doesn't make sense to me. But go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's funny because a lot of these people who are like, we need public schools, their kids are not in public schools. I just think like they pull their kids out. They either pull them out or they knew a long time ago that it was not a viable system, and so they didn't want anything to do with it. So this, they say up front all the time, "Oh, public schools, we need to do it." But when you actually go and do a little digging, a lot of them don't even have their kids in public schools. It's so
Mhm.
fun. It's crazy to me. The only reformation that I see that I would be okay. Like what the only thing that I think is possibly good is the holding back. Like the reforming, the changing the school boards. I think that's about as best as you're gonna get. Is I mean, besides like taking down the Department of Education and all those things, but you can hold them back by getting the curriculum change where they're at least not being sexualized. I mean, and then being indoctrinated with critical race theory and things like that. Like you can kind of hold them back, but while you're holding them back, you better be getting your kid out. That's about the only reformation that I see. But you're not going to change the the model, because it was built to have that expert, that authority figure that you can't question, that you aren't supposed that is there to keep you in line with the thinking of how they think you should think, not to uplift and explore your own innovation, your own creativity, your God-given purpose. They're not there to do that. They are there to suppress that. They do not want you to be creative. They don't want you to lean into um, your God-given talent. No, you must memorize these words. You must memorize this stuff, and we will promote you depending on how well you work through our system.
Right.
It has nothing to do with the child being properly informed and educated. And so that's about the only reformation that I see.
I agree. Are you there, Ebony?
Yes, I'm here finally.
Okay.
Hi,
So you
Ebony.
you heard you heard Keisha and I talk about education versus discipleship. You've heard
Yes.
us talk about what is the point of education and the secular nature of it. You heard us talk about this kind of battle within those who see a problem with the public school system, those who wish to reform it versus those who wish for there to be a mass exodus out of it. What are your thoughts on the conversation that Keisha and I just had?
Well, aside from me brick walling you guys, literally, I was listening very intently and heard everything. And um, it's interesting because I don't know if you guys have heard of John Taylor Gatto. He was an I love him, and he kind of encapsulates a lot of what we're talking about by exposing how the public school system is set up to fail. Right? It's intentionally, it's engineered for failure. That may not have been how it started, but anytime you have government entities and agencies get their hooks in something, it turns into a behemoth, of many monsters that it never was intended to be, and now you don't recognize it anymore. Myself, having come out of the public school system, I think that was probably one of the most daunting things about homeschooling, was because I was in fact indoctrinated to believe there's no possible way I could educate my children. I don't have a degree, right? I don't have like a history in this, and I'm going to cause my children to fail. And this is what you're kind of engineered to believe only these people can do it.
Mm-hmm.
What you don't know is that they're just doing what their handlers tell them to do. They themselves may not even be, educated. And I'm talking about not textbook, but educated in how children learn. Because that was probably one of the greatest things for me, was actually learning how my children learn. And then I learned how I learned through teaching them, which was amazing. I found out which child was an auditory visual learner. I found out that two of my children have photographic memories, and all they need to do is see something one time and they remember it.
Hmm.
Right. And so it's interesting. I had to kind of learn my children all over again, essentially through unschooling them. So
Mhm.
it was more a process of unlearning than learning. And John Taylor Gatto talks about this. And I would argue that Marva Collins experienced this, because if you read about all of the people that tried to come against this woman, they even had hired a lot of parents who had sent their child to her school, and then later came out bad mouthing her. Two of them literally said, and I was shocked to find this out, I sent my daughter to Marva's school because I wanted my child to see a Black person in authority. And I thought, that's not why you send your child to anyone's school. Right. So, you clearly had let's just say ulterior motives that had nothing to do with your child's education. And then when they found out, the child wasn't learning, the way that they believe they should learn, then they yanked their child out. Also, you had entities, saying, well, we went to Marva school, and we saw some things we didn't really care for, like the children weren't reading at the level she claimed, and we saw corrections not being made on spelling. But mind you, all of this information where they kind of blew her up outside of like actually looking at what she did was based on a script that they did on her life. It wasn't even something she herself had said. And so they passed out this script, thousands and thousands of them, to the surrounding schools, and said, well, this woman said that within, a year, she could have children reading 5 grades beyond their level. And she never made such a statement. So you could see that there's this aggression toward people taking education into their own hands. And these structures that are kind of built off of claiming they're offering a solution to a problem you never knew you had. They don't like when they get knocked down and you say, I don't really need to use everything you offer because you're just a tool, right? And I can use the tools I need and discard the ones I don't. And they're like, no, we're not having that. You need us. We need to educate your children. You're going to cause them to fail. Oh, no, we can't have this. Last thing I'll say is Harvard put together a symposium about maybe a year or two ago, right in the throes of all the snake bite drama, as as our beloved friend likes to call it. And they were having a meeting about homeschoolers who need to be maybe informed that they don't have the certification or the degree to educate their children, and what can be done about it to hold them accountable. So they really have a problem with parents who want to educate their own children.
That's so funny because I've seen where, I forget where I saw this, where excuse me, universities and corporations were looking for homeschooled kids because they found that they had to get the public school kids, they were so behind that, they were spending so much time on like the remedial lessons and stuff that they had to spend all this money and, or this time rather, getting the kids caught up to a college level where they were looking for homeschool kids because, I mean, they're just far superior than public school kids. And that's not to say that you can't have some kids, because I can hear it now. My kid went to public school and they're a genius at MIT. Yes, okay. Yes, there are exceptions to the rule, but the vast majority of public school kids just do not, they don't do well in it. I mean, just think about the atmosphere of of a school. I mean, you are telling a kid to sit in one place and to memorize this information, and they can't talk, they can't think out loud, they can't do anything. It's like a prison, and they're there just supposed to sit there and just consume all this stuff, and they wonder why kids hate school. When I start telling parents or kids about this model and why it functions the way it functions, things like that, they're like, no wonder why I hated school. They feel like their mind, they're like, oh my God, that makes so much sense, because it feels so restricting. It feels like you're not supposed to think. You're only supposed to think what someone else thinks. You know what I mean? Like it's not an environment that fosters like ideas. It's just it's more of a prison. And so yeah, you see, I think when people are when they understand what it was meant to do, and then they can see it, then hopefully they'll do it what you and I did, Ebony, and take that leap. But yeah, I see colleges that are some of them at least are looking for homeschooled kids.
Shout out to Stimulated Students. They left the super chat, says, keep it going. The education system doesn't need reform. It needs to be destroyed and then properly defined. I agree with that. Then people can build from the bottom. 100% agree. Thank you for the super chat. And to your last point, Keisha, what was your last point again?
I was just saying that there are some colleges and corporations that are looking for homeschool kids.
You're absolutely right. I know one college here in Dallas. A friend of mine works in the admissions department, and he said that the students who do the best whenever they come into their institution are the homeschooled kids. They score the highest on their SATs and ACTs and so on, in their placement tests, and they have better studying habits, and they're not so easily drawn into the kind of decadent college life. They tend to be more focused. And it's funny because there's this kind of stigma that a lot of public school parents have that, at home, I kept them sheltered. We went to church, we did this, and that. But once they got off to college, they went off the rails and they started drinking and they started partying and doing all the things because they were out from under my roof. And so people have learned to kind of be okay, or to brace themselves for what they perceive to be the inevitable of their children coming out from under their roof and just going completely haywire. When in reality, you'll find that a lot of homeschool students or kids, they don't necessarily go off the rails to the same degree or at the same rate that public school kids do. And so for me, it's not so much that your child just suddenly flipped the switch whenever they came out from under your roof. They're doing a lot of those things. They just have learned to keep them secret from you. Like they're a different person at home than they are in that classroom, or when they're hanging out with their friends, out after school or what have you. And they know not to kind of bring that stuff around you per se. And so whenever they are completely out from under your roof, they are around their quote unquote friends 24/7, as opposed to having a a kind of compartmentalized life whenever they are at home, if that makes sense. Where, you know what I mean? So it's like, the fact of the matter is, whenever, from what I know in my own kind of anecdotal experience, my wife homeschools our children. All of her friends homeschools their children, and it's not just mere academics. They're also teaching discipline and ethics and, wisdom and all the things. They're discipling the children to where once they come of age, they maintain some of the, or much of the foundation with which they were discipled, if that makes sense. So, Jambalaya Talks mentioned Marva Collins. I did want to play some clips from a 1981 uh, Marva Collins mini doc. So Ebony kind of jumped ahead, but that's okay. I love
I'm
it.
sorry.
No, you're fine. You're absolutely fine. And you're right. They did kind of come out with the attacks and stuff because, as it happened, Marva Collins started her school in 1975. 1981, it was such a success that a camera crew came and they did a mini documentary on her school. A lot of people caught wind of this. A lot of politicians caught wind of this, and they thought it was a great thing. So they actually made a movie um, about Marva Collins, starring I forget her name. She just recently died. Some old black actress. And then,
Cicely Tyson.
yeah, there you go, Cicely Tyson and Morgan Freeman, a younger Morgan Freeman. The two of them starred in that film, and she was lionized in a sense. And then, of course, the attack dogs came out, sponsored by the teachers unions and all the rest of them, the CPS, Chicago Public Schools. But what's funny, or what's interesting about something that Ebony mentioned, is that, when it comes to these activists who promote the glory of public school, I think you mentioned this too, Keisha, they themselves don't have their children in public schools. They themselves seek out private school or elite schools to have their children educated. And this is also true of men like Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson considers himself a staunch advocate for teachers unions. He speaks at many teachers unions events. However, living in Chicago, guess where he sent his kids to school? Marva Collins' school. So that tells me everything I need to know about whether her program worked or not. So I wanted to introduce the audience to who Marva Collins is in the way of a clip, and then we can discuss what it is we're talking about, or what it is we're seeing in real time. So let's start with, let's see here. Start with this one.
In the door, I will say to them, welcome to success, say goodbye to failure, because here you are going to fail. I'm not going to let you fail. You're here to win. You were born to win. And if I have to care more about you than you care about you, that's the way it will be. This day has been given to me. This day has been given to me. Fresh and clean. Fresh and clean. I can either use it. Or throw it away. I promise that it shall be used. Not lost. I will be superior in my ability. In my thoughts. In my deeds. And in my actions. And you must be.
This is Marva Collins, a Chicago City school teacher who, dissatisfied with her own children's education, decided to start her own school.
Basically, 5 years ago, I just felt that there were far too many children being recruited for failure, far too many excuses being used for not educating children. Living in this area myself, I really felt that somehow there were far too many lives just hanging out there in a perilous vacuum. So I decided that whatever I did, I could do no worse. So I decided to start my own school.
Westside Preparatory School was born September 8, 1975, located in Marva's Westside Chicago home.
So, Ebony, your thoughts?
You're muted, Ebony, if you're chatting.
Sorry, guys. Um, yeah, behind the scenes, the technical difficulties are being worked on by my wonderful husband. So we're jumping back and forth between the screen. Forgive me. Um, yeah. So first of all, I think you have to acknowledge that a woman who is willing to tap into her own finances to do this deserves much praise and hats off, because she stood to lose more than she stood to gain. Um, Also, if you look at what a lot of her motto was, it was that, I think I'm going to kind of paraphrase, but I think she said it's better for a man to be taught to stand than to lean, or something to that effect. Um, and so when I watched the video last night, I didn't realize that I'd heard of her only peripherally through the movie of Cicely Tyson. And when I saw who she actually was, I was like consuming everything I could. That's why I took a picture of my notes, and I'm like, God dog it, Chad, every time I know I'm gonna do a video with you, I'm gonna like be studying for about 5 hours because and not because, this platform, we have to like wax eloquent or try and impress anybody. It's just that the information, we're not really like given this information, and you learn about these people and you're like, wow, like look at, this woman was like ahead of her time, right?
Mhm.
I mean, so listening to what she had to say, you could see that, exactly to your point and to Keisha's point, she was very determined to not just educate them. She was determined to show them they could build character. That
Mhm.
is to me part and parcel of what she was trying to get to them. There wasn't this kind of fake, I'm going to build you up and tell you you're great and wonderful and you could do it. No, it was, you're going to learn how to operate as an individual within a team. I have an expectation of you. And even if you have missteps along the way, that does not define the entirety of who you are, which
Right.
is what the educational system teaches because of the standardized testing and whatnot. So that's mostly what I gleaned from reading about her and watching that video.
Keisha.
So I watched it this morning, and I was just like, I would, she's incredible. She was like Jamalai said, or Ebony said, before her time. And I just when I heard the affirmations that she had the kids doing, I was just thinking it really makes me sad. Like, I'm not gonna cry. I know I've been like super emotional lately, but it does make me sad because now, instead of kids going in and getting a, you can learn today, you can be anything you want to be, you can do all this, they go in, it's like, I'm oppressed because my skin is black. I am, the white man is my oppressor, and there's white supremacy everywhere, and I need to tear America down because it is the problem. It is, that will solve all of my problems because I'm black. And I mean, it's a vast difference, and we wonder why particularly black children are, remain on the bottom of, when you look at the statistics of where kids are reading and doing math and science and in those core studies. They typically are on the bottom because they are being inundated on top of this mass compulsory Prussian model that's not built for them to learn anyway. On top of that, these black children are learning that because they're black, they can't do anything. And that some external factor, white people, just this nameless, faceless, just whiteness, is holding them back. And so it just, the shift of what a child is faced with back then as opposed to now. I mean, and it was so bad back then that she was doing this, because it was bad then. On top, and we have, I think it's even worse. So you have the layer of not being educated, plus this idea being pounded into you that you cannot achieve. And so it's just bad all the way around. And so that was what I thought of when I heard her giving those affirmations to the kids, which I thought was beautiful.
Working with children, it's how you teach them. It's a certain way you teach them. I've gone to other schools and I've seen how they work with children, but it's nothing like she would teach them. She always tells them that you will never fail. You will always succeed.
That's right. And the poison?
And the poison around we go.
Very good. I think people attribute really what I do as being a miracle when it's simply hard work and preparation. Other teachers can get the same results that I get by developing a positive attitude. However, I have had many teachers work with me, and I think until one is open to suggestions of I want to become a better teacher, I want to become a better anything, it doesn't have to be a teacher. And I think once we stop striving to be better and settle for average, then that's about it.
You're muted.
So she said that once we start striving to be better instead of settling for average, that's basically what we get. What are your thoughts on that, Keisha?
Truth. It's common sense. That's why this whole critical race theory thing was so weird to me, and to see Black people no, we need critical race. I'm like, do you understand what they're telling your children? Like, you're literally teaching them that they can't be anything. Yet that is settling for, that's worse than average. That is like worse than average. And if they can't even be average, you're literally teaching them that they should strive for nothing. I don't understand these people who want to tell, who claim that they care so much about Black children and then come in with these philosophies or theories like critical race theory and think that is somehow going to empower them. It doesn't make sense to me. And I don't understand. I mean, I do understand, but then it's like, why doesn't it ever click? Like, you would never tell your kid, sorry, y'all, I get a little passionate. You would never tell your child, your skin color is going to, you made a bad grade because you're Black. You don't say it that way. Like, you would never tell your child that in that way, but you tell them that you give them that idea in other ways by like you can't achieve because you're Black, but you won't say you failed this test because you're Black. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, they don't say it that way, but when they say it the common way of through the lens of a critical race theory way, it's totally fine. And I'm shocked that they don't make the connection. It's
right.
Crazy.
Blanche left a comment. He says, hold on. He says, "Mama, I got a D- because my teacher is racist." That will actually fly now.
Yes.
If I told my mother that, I would have gotten beat on. Same here. Same here. But the fact is, like, yes, Blanche is absolutely right. That is something that flies today, because there is this kind of fetishization of Blackness and of race in general, where, and this is to your point, Keisha, this is the problem with critical race theory. When you teach children to think of everything in terms of race and to look at every dynamic or dichotomy of, mistreatment, or what can be perceived or construed as mistreatment versus quote unquote privilege, or what can be construed or perceived as privilege, to look at all that as a kind of byproduct of systemic injustice or systemic racism, naturally, to the extent that you get a bad grade, if you're indoctrinated to believe that you're having gotten the bad grade compared to your white, fellow student who got a better grade, to look at that not as something that you did, but to look at that as a kind of act of racism on the part of your teacher, like, that's the net result of teaching critical race theory in schools, and teaching the praxis of critical race theory in schools.
Yes.
Nothing is really my fault. It's always something someone else did to me. And so I think that on the one hand, you do have students who who know that they're being manipulative, and they know what words to say to get their mom up at the school, yelling at the teachers, this and that. But I think that there are also a lot of students who genuinely believe that they're having gotten a bad grade as a result of the teacher being racist. So I don't know how to kind of quantify who is who. In any event, I think it's wrong. Whether it's the result of a child having been indoctrinated to genuinely believe that that's an act of racism, or whether it's a child who know it's not an act of racism, but know that they can play to the emotions of their black mother or father, to be up at the school, because of something that's not really a factor. Ebony, so she had mentioned Marva Collins earlier in the clip that what she's doing is not a miracle. What she's doing is a result of hard work. What she's doing is a result of dedication. And I think that's an important thing to point out because, when it comes to students, and this was in Chicago, even then in 1975, 1981, was not exactly a pleasant place to be with with uh with regard to crime, with regard to all the things. So even then, Chicago wasn't this exactly a kind of metropolis.
Right.
But she was able to go in and take these kids that were rejected by the Chicago public school system, be it because of learning deficiencies or behavioral issues, and she was able to get them to actually care about their education and to be, I guess, upstanding people, so to speak. A lot of people will look at that and say, well, that's a miracle. But for her to say that, no, that's not a miracle, that's actually hard work and dedication. What do you think? Like, what mindset do you think that exposes? If that question makes sense.
Yeah,
Personally.
I think it exposes that if you put in place a set of conditions that are already low bar, there's nothing to excel to. And so it makes sense. Like when I went to public school, one thing I'm very grateful for, though I'm very honest, I've only gone to the 9th grade, but the way that I can articulate myself, the way that I, am an avid reader, did not come from the public school, but it did come from the type of school I went to. I was bussed out to Pacific Palisades in California, where I'm from. And I could argue with the way I've heard people speak and the low level of reading here in Louisiana. My 9th grade education is almost like a college degree here. Just the things that I've seen people, or I should say the way in which people articulate and discuss things and their level of understanding, and the fact that they were like actually sent all the way through college, that would have never ever happened where I was. So to give an example, I had an English teacher who gave me a box of cards because he knew I had a love for words and a love for reading. Like I would read the dictionary and look at the pronunciation. I was a nerd as a kid, not knowing I was a nerd because I had such troubled upbringing, but I loved words. And he gave me a set of cards that had the word on the front, the pronunciation, and the syllable breakdown on the back. And the first word he made me look up was loquacious and he fell out laughing because he said, "This perfectly describes who you are." And so he challenged me to look up all of these words and know their meanings and pronunciation. He also had me, and I was probably about 11, 12, had me reading Silas Marner, Red Badge of Courage, A Tale of Two Cities, which I still love to this day. And so just like, Marva, who has her students reading, Shakespearean language and the classics, I was exposed to that. That doesn't happen here in Louisiana. Because, obviously, like Keisha said, that's, against CRT. We can't have you reading those European books. What do you need that for? So I think to the degree that you tell children there's an expectation of them, though they may not be ready for it yet, they have something to aspire to. My 10-year-old and Keisha and I just learned this about her, that she has a special needs child. And I felt like a special kinship when you shared that with me, because I was like, wow, any mom who can homeschool a child that is special needs, hats off to you, man. Much respect. Because my child is 10 years old and she is special needs. She has cerebral palsy and she has all kinds of health issues. In fact, I was up till 4 this morning with her. It's a miracle I'm here right now. I should be passed out somewhere. But she cut up and cried and had her whole little moment last night. But she's well read. she just learned the song Girls Just Want to Have Fun from a science program she watches. And of course, they changed the lyrics. And I said, that's a song from mommy's teenage years. And she said, really? She's like, I want to learn that song. So she asked my eldest, who plays guitar, to print out the music sheet for her. She promptly went to the piano and started playing the song by sound, by ear. Yes.
Wow.
And I have video of it, and I posted it on Twitter and Instagram, where she's playing the actual chords of the song. So God. I don't think that would have ever happened if she had been, it had been going to public school, because she would have had to deal with the teasing, because of the way she walks. She would have dealt with the teasing because of her skin condition. And so being able to be in an environment where I've not allowed her to use the fact that she has cerebral palsy as an excuse to not live up to my expectations of proper behavior, right? I allow for her issues, but it's not an excuse. She never ever says, well, it's because I have cerebral palsy, though she knows she has it. She doesn't want you to tell her she can't do something. And in fact, she'll fight you to show you she can do it. So I think there is something to be said with that mindset. Is meant to condition people to not try or aspire to do something better. Because listen, if you have to depend on a group of people who are telling you they will educate you, the last thing we need is you thinking you can actually do something outside of that paradigm.
Man, oh my gosh. Well, it just warms my heart. I'm like, I don't know why I'm so emotional lately. Oh my God, I just feel like a waterhead these days. People, I remember when my daughter was diagnosed, and they were like, it's a very rare chromosomal disorder, and so they're like, we don't know what's gonna happen, and she may be this, she may be that, and she has like excelled beyond like all of these experts, all of their expertise, and I don't know about you, Ebony, but when my daughter, when she was first born and she was, I started to see, the delays and things like that. I think most parents, you have your instinct is to like kind of coddle them. But I remember one day, because she was nonverbal till about 5 years old. And so one day she was about 3. And I had given her like a 3-sentence command, something like, go over there, pick that up, do this, and then do that. It was like 3 things I had told her to do. And she did it. And I was like, oh, she really, she's really understanding all this stuff. She might not be talking, but she clearly understands like everything that's going on. And so from that point on, the more I pushed her into independence, the more it was, she had to get her footing first. But now it's like, oh yeah, I can totally do this. And she is, much like your little one, if you try to tell her that she can't, I mean, she will go ham. And sometimes she gets like in this phase, so she has always been really good with reading and spelling and like phonics. And so it was because of, she started therapy early on. I've had really great support throughout the years with counselor, therapists and stuff like that, and good, just making sure I paid a lot of attention to their education. Anyway, the other, like a couple weeks ago, her sister said, you can't even spell the word nothing. And I was like, spell it, because I knew she could. And she just went through this, and she was like, I can't spell it. And then I was like, no, you're going to sit down. So I was like, no, I know you know how to spell this word. And now you're going to write it 50 times. I was so mad because she was being so defiant. She would not spell the word. Anyway, she spells the word. And then after she's like, look, mommy, like I spelled the word. And, she was just like so proud of herself. And so this idea, I said all of that to say, children absolutely need that push to do things on their own and accept, you know where they are at, what they're capable of, you got to figure that out, but to force them to think and to force them to figure stuff out and to reinforce that, no, you are smart and you can do this. So I love this story, Ebony.
What strikes me and what's so touching about hearing you both talk about, your special needs kids. I'm sorry, I thought I was getting feedback on. Okay, so yeah, what strikes me and what's touching about hearing you guys talk about your special needs kids is the fact that you are actually working one-on-one with them, and you're seeing that real progress. You're seeing these strides, and to your point, Keisha, that defies even the so-called experts who really don't know much at all. And it's funny when you think about it, not so much funny as much as it is sad, that when it comes to the masses of Black students as a result of critical race theory being taught in schools, is they are conditioned to see themselves as special needs, and seeing themselves as special needs, and thus requiring certain modifications in education, even going as far down as who is actually educating them. I wanted to show you guys this video to give you an example of what I'm talking about. I shared this with Blanche months ago, and I never really did anything with the clip, but I thought it's very indicative of a lot of what we see going on today, especially, I guess, in this emergence of critical race theory. Where does this go? There it is, right there. Okay, here you go.
Mostly white teachers in a school full of Black people. You trying to tell me about my history, and you're not even my skin color.
I grew up on a farm in Ohio.
So he says, you're trying to tell me about my history, and you're not even my skin color. Again, this goes to show that for a lot of Black students, they, as a result of critical race theory and the practice of it being taught in schools, are conditioned to believe that they themselves are special needs. And part of my being a special needs student, I need a teacher who is my skin color, because that skin color equals competency in terms of telling me about my history. And that's only one of many examples in terms of the special needs kind of persona that critical race theory has turned our kids into, if that makes sense. Well, I'll go ahead and let the rest of the clip ride out because I don't remember what all else was in it.
A white Mennonite girl on a farm in Ohio. So what would you like to see your teachers do? What would you want me to do and other teachers here?
A student had asked me, what is the name of your wife? And I said, he is my spouse. And he is not my wife. And there was a silence that hung in the room for a minute. The kids sort of looked at each other, confused.
Okay, so I forgot that was in there. But yeah, I mean, even that is very shocking when you look at the public school system today, teaching, critical race theory, teaching LGBT philosophy, and all the rest of it, is basically like, this is the state of modern public school education, as it were.
Yeah, this idea that you have to be the same color as me to tell you something, that's just like saying a doctor, if you haven't had cancer, then you can't treat cancer. Like, what? Like, this is stupid. Like, this is so dumb. And just to touch on the gender ideology and the LGBTQ stuff, like, back in my day, if you would have even asked the teacher or something like that, they would have told you none of your business. Nowadays, it's like these teachers feel like they have to share every single thing with the child. It's like that is none of their business. All you had to do is say, Johnny, have you finished your work? Have you finished your whatever? You redirect their attention to what they have no business wondering who about your spouse and all that kind of stuff. That is none of their business. That's not what they're there to do. And I just want to make a quick point. Like, I saw one of our members in the chat said, if parents, it's all about the parents. It's unreasonable to expect that a teacher is going to be personally invested in each student. It's the parents' job to hold their kids to high academic expectations. I certainly agree. And just for the record, my children now are in, well, my oldest has always done a homeschool co-op. My little one, I don't homeschool her anymore because it was like we just end up fighting. But so she's in a homeschool co-op with at the same co-op with her older sister, and it's working really well for them. So I am not their teacher. So, but I still think that parents you can still get great education when your values align with, like if you do choose a homeschool co-op or a micro, something that's an alternative. Because I think the more that parents get out of this idea of going away from public schooling, and maybe they don't like maybe they choose a co-op, I don't want to discourage parents from trying a co-op or a micro school or something like that because they aren't the teacher. Because sometimes, like, I just realized, like, me and my daughter, like my little one, we were just going to sit there and fight. So it was just better for her to do the co-op. Now I'm very close with their teacher. Like, she's, I can sit there all day. In fact, I did sit there all day, for a couple of days when they first started going there, just to kind of see how everything went. It's a totally different thing. Certainly it's different from when a public school teacher is teaching and a co-op or a micro school or some type of alternative. So I just want to let parents know, like, if you're not the teacher, you can still have others who do care about the education of your kids, and you still be the overseer of that. So it's just different ways.
Yeah. So Kichi, you mentioned phonics earlier, and intensive phonics was one of the staples of Marva Collins's curriculum. So I wanted to play a clip that explains that a little bit. This clip is a little long, so if you or if Ebony want to interject something or make a comment on something, just say so, and I will pause the video, and we'll close it out with this clip because we are a little past an hour. And then my hope is that we can pick up on this conversation sometime next week or the week after. So let's see here. Okay, so I had it ready, but then I clicked off of it, and now I got to start over again. So a little bit of dead air, but bear with me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stimulated student says some Black teachers think like that. You got to be Black to know Black stuff.
Yeah.
Many times we need more Black doctors. Yeah, that's true. I've heard that too.
What if you're a Latina and Black? Which side should I tap into to know that?
Oh man, it's so convoluted.
Okay, so here's Marva Collins on phonics.
Teaching tools at Westside Prep is the teaching of phonics. Phonics teaches not just the letters of the alphabet, but all the individual sounds of the English language.
There are about 93 basic sounds in the English language, more or less. Phonics, you simply learn every sound, syllables in words that we speak in the English language or any other language, and you sound the sounds out that are next to each other. For example, in the word mother, there are 4 basic sounds there, right? They can be spoken, they can be written. We teach the children how they look, and we teach them how to write the sounds. That's phonics. Basic sounds in the English language. The children use them for spelling, for writing compositions. If you know your sounds, you can read and write anything. That's phonics.
So, ladies, what she just explains seems so simple, but why is something so simple so important in your guys' opinion?
I'll let Ebony go.
Can you repeat the question again, Joe?
So the clip that I just played, or that portion of the clip, what she just explained in terms of what phonics is, seems so simple, But why in your opinion is something so simple also so important?
Well, it takes agencies to complicate everything, doesn't it? Because I actually taught my children this way. In fact, the same special needs daughter I'm telling you about, I actually taught her signing first before she ever even spoke. And she was able to sign back to me. And thank God for a very good friend of mine who was my doula with her, actually taught me signing because she used to do this in school. And so with her students, with her special needs students. And I taught myself first, then taught her. And it was amazing because she was having a language that she could use back with me. And remember, this is coming from someone who has a ninth grade education. So, I'm not certified to teach. I don't have a degree, but I think it's difficult, uh, intentionally difficult for them to teach this or grasp this because, again, this is kind of like, the medical field, right? If we could actually give you basic natural ways to holistically heal yourself, then how would we make money off of pharmaceuticals? We
Mm-hmm.
can't keep you healthy and then run ourselves out of business. So, it's a hand scratching the back, scratching the back, scratching the back. So it's engineered to be that way. I do want to share something very quickly because I know we're going to be closing out that John Taylor Gatto said. He said, so this is called the curriculum of necessity, or what must an educated person know? And this answers the question succinctly. He says, a few years back, one of the schools at Harvard, perhaps the School of Government, issued some advice to its students on planning a career in the new international economy it believed was arriving. It warned sharply that academic classes and professional credentials would count for less and less when measured against real world training. 10 qualities were offered as essential to successfully adapting to the rapidly changing world of work. Let's see how many of these 10 you think are regularly taught in the schools of your city or state. The first one, the ability to define problems without a guide. 2, the ability to ask hard questions which challenge prevailing assumptions. 3, the ability to work in teams without guidance. 4, the ability to work absolutely alone. 5, the ability to persuade others that your course is the right one. 6, the ability to discuss issues and techniques in public with an eye to reaching decisions about policy. 7, the ability to conceptualize and reorganize information into new patterns. 8, the ability to pull what you need quickly from masses of irrelevant data. That's sorely lacking today for sure. 9, the ability to think inductively, deductively, and dialectically. And 10, the ability to attack problems heuristically. That, I think, is why they try to overcomplicate very basic things, because
Mm-hmm.
then we won't need them.
Oh
100%.
man. I told you when I saw her doing this, I mean, this is like classical education. This is if you ever come across a classical school, a lot of times they are very well, like they function much differently than your typical school, much differently than a typical charter school.
That was our
Um,
first homeschool, Keisha. Actually, Classical Conversations was how I actually got into it.
I mean, because they don't do the sight words. Because now instead of phonics, they teach them sight words. So
Mm-hmm.
you just memorize the sight words, but you don't know. Like if once you come across a word that, like let's say you love reading, and so now you're reading on your own, and you come across a word that you haven't memorized. How do you teach a child to pronounce that word if they don't know phonics? That's
Right.
why it's another reason why kids are doing bad on tests, because they can't even read the directions to know. I'm serious. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. They cannot even read what is required of them for that portion of the test.
Yeah, they're taught to memorize, not to master. It's not,
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
yeah, to understand how you can use this as a tool, right? And a metric so that maybe you can use it again in a plethora of ways. That's a
Mhm.
discipline. They're not teaching education as a discipline. They're teaching
Yeah.
it as, remember this, you're never going to use most of it. And we're not going to teach you things that actually are practical that you can, have an application for, so that when you go and get your career, you just have a piece of paper, like John Taylor says, that shows that you passed, uh, understanding when a bell rings how to run to run from one class to the other. That's pretty much what you
Exactly.
mastered. You're a good
So
soldier.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I just said you're a good soldier if you can run when the bell says to run.
Exactly. That's exactly what the Prussia model was built upon. The co-op that my children attend, there is no, you either know it or you don't. Like there's no B, C, D. It's either you 100% know it or you fail. There is no in between. And she worked the way she does it. There are teaching is a gift. It is really a talent. And when I saw her, how she could understand how a child was looking at something and then figure out how to explain it back to them depending on how that child was looking at it. It's amazing to see. I'm like, this woman she's like, I don't know, bionic or something. But it was incredible to see a real educator at work. Like, I'm like, man.
She loves these kids too. That's like what came across. She wasn't just, giving information. And that's why I think it's interesting when, the powers that be try to lecture or scold parents that they don't know what's best for them. Maybe it's because we're not obeying Biden, who says they're not your children, they're the world's children. However, right. If it's your child, you have a vested interest in making sure that the full person is being developed. And education is just one discipline. That's all it is. It's not the entirety.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Let's continue on with this clip.
The oak tree. A large oak tree is growing at the edge.
Whatever a child can read in our school, they can also spell. For example, when most children learn the cutesy alphabet song A, B, C, D, E, F, G, we teach them all the spellings there will ever be in this world for A, and that's E-I-G-H-A, A-I-G-H-A, E-Y-A, A-I-A, A blank E-A. There'll never be any more. Block you, use. Airplane, van, lariat, wet, pop sound, looks, baby bird, yuck, yellow. Now we're song, our phonics song. Here are our vowel signals, E, I, and Y. What are vowel signals? E, I, and Y. And see, a child is missing that many spellings. That's why we have so many poor spellers across the country, because most teachers do not want to take the time to really sit there and teach them the heavy doses of phonics. The average PH word knocks a child for a loop. And yet we tell children to use a dictionary. How on earth is a child going to find the word pneumonia unless some teacher has told them that the P is silent and you take those silent words in isolation? But that means that that teacher is on their feet at the blackboard. This is not some sheet that you can give children. And the word is quiz, the violet is moth. Our children learn in patterns. Our children know the rules, I before E, except after C, unless our E has the sound of A as in neighbor and way. Or they know the Italian CH as in Andromache, Achilles. They know the French CH as in Charlie, Charlemagne. Then they know the American CH which says chat, chair. Okay? Now the Italian CH which says cough is, let's say it, ache. What does it say? Champagne. Come like Charlemagne on the board for me. Okay, that's the French CH which says what? They not only know this, they know the words too. They know what they mean. But it means that I have to take these words in isolation during the entire year. But that's why we never give assigned spelling lists. Because what happens when you're assigned spelling words, they learn to spell them to pass a test. And 2 weeks later, they can't spell those words. Very good. Mike, let's give Michael a hand. Okay, what does that say? Charlemagne. Champagne, Charlemagne, okay?
Now, I'm not weak, and nor am I an effeminate man, but the very first time I watched that clip, or not that clip, but the entire documentary, which was like 4 or 5 years ago, I kind of teared up a little bit because, like, for me, going to a public school, we learned to read by way of sight words. And like I was diagnosed with like dyslexia and all this other nonsense when I was a kid. And I later learned that there are, many children across this country who were learned to read by way of sight words. And you saw this kind of spike or increase in dyslexic children. And all the while, it was the fact that we deviated away from basic phonics, from basic intensive phonics. And as a result, all these children are being diagnosed with dyslexia. And downstream of that, they're being diagnosed with having learning disabilities. And the fact is, when I make this point all the time now, but when you learn to read by way of intensive phonics, you learn phonetics, you learn how words work, you kind of grow. Like when reading is easy for you, all the other subjects become a breeze as well, because while learning to read, you're also learning to comprehend. Comprehension is the key to learning. The ability to pick up what someone else is putting down and to understand and dissect complex issues and so on. When you don't even know how to read, you thus don't know how to comprehend. And when you thus don't know how to comprehend, you're not very interested in the way the world works and other subjects. And so it's, I feel that with that clip in particular and with the entirety of the documentary, to see Marva Collins doing it the right way. And I know someone mentioned that she was ahead of her time. I agree with that, but also I would say that it wasn't as if she was reaching forward. It was more or less that she was basically getting back to the basics of what was going on in the one-room schoolhouses, what's been going on for, in some cases, centuries, when it comes to the way in which, a child is taught to read and thus comprehend and thus create. And so I feel that and I'll make this last point before I give it back to Keisha and Ebony, but somebody, I think it was Bree in the comment section, said that the point in American education, public school education, is to turn students into foot soldiers for the state. And I agree with that, because again, when you are established with a solid foundation and the truth of the world, the truth of the world as God created it, and you understand that foundation, you can build a lot based on that foundation with regard to your creativity, because we're all creative in different ways. We're all skilled in different ways. We all have different talents and inclinations, so on and so forth. You have a better chance of building something sustainable, creating something sustainable, whenever you have a solid foundation, as opposed to when you don't. I liken it to whenever, my sister-in-law, for example, she is a photographer, and she can do a lot of stuff with a camera that, would make your head spin. She's a genius when it comes to the camera. But even she would say that I had to learn the foundation or the basics of what the camera is and how the camera operates. I can't go straight to being creative with the camera without first learning the ins and outs, the basics of the camera. Creativity comes downstream of having a solid foundation. And I feel that by not teaching a child phonics, you're not giving them that solid foundation with regard to their academics, to then branch out into other subjects, if that makes sense. But go ahead, guys.
Yeah. Before I forget, Ebony, which John Taylor Gatto book was that you were quoting from?
I think it was from, wait, I'm gonna tell you right now, because I actually wrote it down. You guys don't want to see my desk. It's not pretty.
Y'all don't want to see mine either.
It's chaotic. It's from the curriculum. Wait, I'm sorry. I think it's from the mission. I'll have to send it to you, Keisha.
Okay.
I've got notes all over it and I can't even read what I wrote. So
that's okay. No, but getting back to going, she was prolific for her time, because most people didn't even realize what had been done before.
Right.
So because we had not been even taught about, you talk about not learning history. Most of us have not learned real American history. We have no idea that, and I'm not saying that I just knew this all the time, that, where the public schools came from. I didn't know that either. But I mean, just even just regular, just American history, that most children were educated in that one room schoolhouse, and most kids. So, her taking it back to basics, we have gotten so far into this enlightenment, from these university people, which are indoctrination camps as well. And Ebony, when you mentioned that you educated up to the 9th grade, I was like, it's probably better, like literally probably better that you did not go through the universities. I tell my daughter,
you should have stopped at the 5th grade.
Yeah. Oh, Lord. I tell my daughter, I'm like, if having friends and meeting people that have not gone through the institutions is probably best.
Yeah.
Like, it's honestly turned into one of the questions that I ask people. I'm like, where'd you go to school? Like, I'm always trying to see, like, okay, like, what worldview are you most likely going to be coming at me with, depending on where, if you went through the universities or not. Not everybody. And some of us did. I have a college degree, I have all that. I managed to not be indoctrinated. Well, now, but it certainly was. But yeah, just taking it back to what's common sense. I mean, we're literally telling people that boys can be girls, and you have Harvard educated people who will sit in front of Congress and debate this topic. It is laughable. It's beyond laughable. I don't even know. It's just utter buffoonery. What America has become. You have, these experts who are being pushed to appointed to the United States Supreme Court, who does not know what a woman is, but she's Harvard educated, everyone. She's supposed to be the one that's going to help us really interpret the Constitution. It's like, this lady don't even know. You laid down there and had them children, but you don't know what a woman is. Like, I'm really supposed to take you seriously. And you think that pedophiles should get less time. You think that the sentencing against pedophiles is harsh. Like, these people are whack jobs. Like, they're literally nuts. I don't know an elegant way to say it. They're nuts. They're freaking crazy. So yes, go back to what we, just common sense. Let's just start there. Let's just start with some common sense.
But I think, to you and Chad's point, I mean, one common theme in this whole discussion has been that, you can't let education be defined for you.
Mm-hmm.
You just simply can't, right? I mean, I have probably, and I'll say on both fronts, in my spiritual walk and educationally, I have actually come to learn more without the restraints of the lairds of the land. I just have, because there's no one to tell me how far I can go. And you know what I've learned about myself within the course of, I would say, 20 years? I've literally learned that I don't have a specific thing I'm interested in. I'm interested in everything. Mm-hmm. It's just my nature to, if I can read about piloting, and I have no desire to know about that, but because there's maybe a human interest story connected to it, I will go and read it. And then I'll go look up everything I can, because I find that one story usually kind of flows over into another story. Now you're learning about, a war that happened and people that were involved that you didn't know about. I learned about the first Black pilot in World War II. I'd never even heard of him, because he doesn't get the same mentions as the same people that they tell us about over and over again in school. So you're allowed to kind of go beyond the borders created for you. Same thing with scripture. If I'm not reading the Bible within the, confines of what the pastor tells me in a sermon, no knock to the pastor, and I'm just reading it to learn it and understand it so I can actually apply it. Now the horizons have gone far above and beyond the sermon. And now I'm reading things that I was maybe conditioned subconsciously, I don't really need to read that because that's old, or it's ancient, or it's not for me, or whatever. Now the Bible is just one whole book to me. You know, it's not the Old Testament, it's just the whole book. All of it is the word of God. So now a lot of things open up to you.
Yeah.
And I'll leave my lovely panel who I'm allowed to come and be a guest with, both of you, with this quote from John Taylor. He says, "Don't let your schooling interfere with your education." I love that quote.
Love it.
There you go.
Perfect way to end.
Let's see. There's a little bit more from this left, like a couple seconds, so we'll finish it.
You see the difference between, what's the difference between this word and that word? The what? What happens? The vowel signal E hits the vowel before it and makes it say its what? Makes it say its name. You see, look, E, I, and Y are like the traffic lights. They're vowel what? They're vowel signals.
That's the advantage of knowing phonics, because once you know a sound, you recognize it in any word, anywhere, no matter how small the word is, no matter how large it is.
I cut my finger, but my puppy is what? Come on. I cut my finger, but my puppy is Q. CU says Q. QU says what? Qua.
Marva's phonics program gets results. Students are reading well above grade levels. Students who came here because they had not learned to read in other schools.
Now juxtapose that against the fact that most students today are reading well below grade level, and most students today are educated in public schools. This isn't a coincidence. Keisha, what say you?
It's not a coincidence. I mean, it's a setup. There's so much more to the story when we say that, you know, this model was imported from Prussia. You know, there were a lot of people that were involved in getting this model to America because they wanted to basically have a monopoly on the market for their businesses. You know, they wanted, I think Ebony was saying, you know, moving from station to station when the bell rings, learning that when a bell rings in a school, the purpose of that was to help them to start to get into the mindset of moving from station to station when they go to the factory. So they weren't teaching them to be innovators or entrepreneurs and small business owners and you know, scientists and thinking of different things to bring to our society. They were teaching them to work for them. Like, you know, the Carnegies, honestly, were very instrumental in this model, and they were big business owners. And, you know, I guess we're supposed to uplift them. And we can say, okay, you did these good things over there, but the fact of the matter is, you wanted this mass group of people, a mass group of Americans, to basically work for you, and so you could keep your corner of the market. And so, the more we can understand this stuff, the more we can do something about it. Teaching your kids to be entrepreneurial, to make their own way. Let's go back to a Booker T. Washington way of thinking. Let's go back to a biblical way of thinking. And so I think the more we can get this out into the public, hopefully it will spark the minds of Americans, because I think intuitively we know something's wrong. You know, we can all see something's wrong, and hopefully people will get some common sense and implement the right things to get to a proper solution.
I agree. You have any comments, Ebony?
Yeah, just lastly, there was a gentleman by the name of Wayne Teague. He was the superintendent of schools for the state of Alabama. He came up when I was looking up Marva, and he actually visited Westside Prep with some of his aides, and he literally said, "I'm unimpressed. I didn't see anything that would help." Listen to this, that would help the Alabama public schools. And I thought to myself, first of all, you guys were all against this woman, right? They have articles in the New York Times where people were, you know, in their feelings behind what Marva did and trying to disprove her success. And I thought to myself, how interesting, the superintendent of the schools of the state would be demanding that this one woman with her one-room schoolhouse would have to do anything for the public school system, instead of saying, what can we do to help you? So that's usually what I find with these, government entities. They will, I mean, I've experienced in my own homeschooling, you'll get a lot of naysayers. They'll criticize, what curriculum you want to use, if your children are going to have best friends, outside of your homeschooling, because they're all of a sudden very concerned with their social abilities to have conversation, which I find homeschool children conversate the best and can actually hold conversations because they critically think. But when I was reading that, I wrote a note for myself, and I wrote, leaders see a problem and look for ways to solve them. But there are instances where the problems are more lucrative if they remain problems. The problem solvers just get in the way. That was just my own thought about this whole thing. So
Very well said.
Yes.
Very, very well said. I mean, that's the last century. That's more than the last century, but I guess as it pertains to right now here in the United States, with this kind of incremental, gradual secularization of society, I would say demonic secularization of society. This is that demonic secularism is the very faith of the social engineers and the expert class who has basically shaped our society in terms of public opinion, in terms of curriculum, in terms of the Overton window in which the mainstream media operates both left and right. It is this, kind of demonic secularism that shrieks at the individual, the problem solver who comes along and talks about things as they see it from a biblical perspective. You're laughed out of court. You are lambasted as a religious fanatic, this, and that. I was watching a conversation between Coleman Hughes and John Wood Jr. John Wood Jr. says that he's a Christian. Coleman Hughes says that he is a secular atheist, and they're having a conversation. And I was curious to see where the conversation went. And naturally, John Wood Jr., who's supposed to be the Christian, was acquiescing and yielding the narrative and basically decomposing his quote unquote biblical beliefs so as to make room for Coleman Hughes's more secular atheistic beliefs. And this is oftentimes what happens in the public square.
That's my AC is broken, you guys, and that's my repairman that I've been waiting for 2 days. So I will see you guys next time.
All right, take care. See you next week.
Bye, Keisha. See you.
But yeah, that's oftentimes what happens when it comes to the public square over the past century, where those who are supposed to be quote unquote Christians give up ground to the secular demonic atheist types because they're intimidated by what is perceived to be the intelligence of the atheist types. We very much live in their world with regard to science, with regard to academia, with regard to morals, even ironically. And it's crazy. And so this is why, for me, I advocate for, like, regardless of what the culture is doing, regardless of what society is doing, it's incumbent upon us, those of us who are God's remnant, to live as such, to live as communities of people who live by the tenets of biblical principles, regardless of what other people are doing. When it comes to public school education, I'm not an advocate for the reformation of the public school system, because again, the very foundation of the public school system is rooted in secularism, is rooted in a culture that detests God, that hates God.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, to reform the system from a biblical perspective is to assume that everybody in our society, everybody in our culture are Christians when they're not. So you can't ask for the masses of society to adopt a Christian interpretation of a thing when they themselves aren't Christian.
Absolutely.
The best way to proselytize one's faith is to live out that faith and to be the light shown to the world as an exemplar of that faith. And to the extent that people see that light and the salt, to the extent that they see the light and feel the salt, they then will be attracted to it. And if they're not, okay, that's not my problem. I'm not the Holy Spirit. I can't presume to be the Holy Spirit. I can only, do and what I'm called to do. I can only be obedient. And if God wishes to change the heart of a given individual, he will do it. But I'm not going to focus and spend my wills on trying to make you believe what I believe, even if it means compromising what I believe so I can be your friend.
Yes, I know you can't see me behind this very still frozen avatar, but I have a bobblehead thing going on as you're speaking. So I'm just nodding fiercely, like, yes, yes, yes. Yeah, I believe that because we are less Rothschilds and more Laura Ingalls, we're going to always have a problem because we are counterculture. The culture has become something demonic, as you said. I can't think of a better term for that. And because of that, what is evil, what is debased and denigrated will always be elevated, because remember, we live in a majority rule society. So if the majority rules and you don't go along with what the majority says, the problem isn't in fact us and what we're doing, even if you can prove to the contrary, right? We talked about the children that are failing, and most of them are in public school, are proof positive that something's going on. Well, even if we can prove it, it doesn't matter, because these systems are hell-bent on doing everything that is contrarian to what's true. So we have to kind of just plant our feet, and like the scripture says, having done everything therefore to stand. You don't move 1 inch, you don't cede any ground, because truth that yields to evil is not truth anymore. So you have to allow yourself to have the tide come against you, wash over you, maybe even drag you in, understanding that God is there even at the bottom of that ocean. That's how you have to think.
Wow.
And also, I would say that our children are our most precious resource. They are a precious gift. They don't, in fact, belong to us. I used to think that way. I have to protect my children because I'm their mother. And now I've learned over the years, I'm actually just a steward, which I think comes with great responsibility. Yes, I have love and affection for my children, but I have accountability for them and to them. And because my accountability is to the Most High God, there is a reverential fear in the way that I raise them. And yes, even educate them. I think it's interesting that the scriptures say that Yeshua, Jesus, actually became trained. He was learning, and I know that throws some people off because you're like, well, he's God. But he demonstrated in the physical form of man that he himself too had to take on a trade and learn something. And it says that he grew in stature and in knowledge, right? So thank God there was no public school, because he probably would have had his parents picketing outside of it. So,
Right.
Jesus is not going here, and neither should you. So
Right.
yeah. So I think we need to adapt that same mentality.
I agree. Stimulated Student says that dysfunction is $1 billion industry. I'm guessing he's piggybacking off of your quote, and both of you are absolutely right. It is $1 billion industry, and these people thrive on chaos. They feed off of it, because in the midst of that chaos, there are emotions stirring up as well. Some of those emotions are fear. Some of those emotions are, pride. There's a whole slew of emotions, and they can then leverage those emotions to gain power all the more. I make the point all the time about the civil rights movement is an example of this. You create the chaos. You say that we are the proponents of nonviolence, and you go to the streets knowing that violence is going to ensue because you broke the law in terms of pulling the permits and stuff. Once that chaos breaks out, you then have the cameras to capture the chaos going on. That image on people's screens produces shockwaves across the country, where people are now demanding that something be done. And conveniently, here is legislation that if you pass it, we can stop all of this. And so again, the whole point of the chaos is to expand the power of the elite class, of the government, of the so-called expert class, to make them kind of gods among men, as it were. This is the reason why they insist upon keeping people at each other's throats. Republican versus Democrat, teaching children or dumbing children down, not teaching them anything really. And on that note, why do we trust the government to educate our children in the first place? Like, how does that not occur to anybody that you are literally entrusting the government that doesn't do anything well, can't even run a post office right. You're trusting the government to educate your children. I mean, that to me is bizarre.
We trust them to feed us. We trust them to house us. We trust them to tell us that, this medicine will fix this problem, even though it'll create 20 more. I mean, to your point, I think it actually takes more work and dedication. And Marva even kind of alluded to this. It takes a lot of dedication and desire to kind of just work very hard. You have to see this as an investment in yourself and in your community. To look into things and question everything. Even scripture says that. Test everything, test every spirit. Don't just take even what somebody says about the word to you, verbatim as though it's true. And it's not about being paranoid. It's about wanting to know true things so that you can do true things. And I'll say this too. I think that one of the greatest casualties of us not looking into things is that it's interesting. We've learned to trust the very people we always say we don't trust. And we've learned to mistrust the people we've literally grown up with or lived next to for years. It's a very interesting kind of sociology that happens, where I will question what you say, though I know where you stand. I can pretty much look at how you live and see your values. Yet I'll still say, well, you know what? This expert, and Keisha even said this expert said this thing. You don't have, the qualifications to tell me, and I know nothing about that person, that talking head on television. So there's this weird kind of inverted thing that happens where we are simultaneously trusting the people we always say we don't trust, and we're questioning all the people we actually know.
Right. Nomo says, as a product of the Alabama public school system through the 7th grade, having attended the absolute worst inner city school by way of the social experimentation called busing, I done learn. I mean, there you go. So it's ironic that this what did you say? This so he was something of schools, some administrative role from Alabama, went to.
Oh yeah, Mr. Teague. He was over the Texas schools.
Oh, Texas. Okay, I thought you said Alabama. TT Mal says, I've learned more as an adult than during my whole school history as a child. Same with me.
Yep.
For me, I was more interested in the social makeup of school than I was in actually learning anything.
Wow.
I was more interested in what was going on with my friends and what we were about to do after school or whatever. A lot of my teachers were coaches, and just going through the motions, getting a sheet, reading a textbook, a chapter in a textbook, answering the questions as it pertains to that chapter in that textbook. And so again, like, it's become this kind of cookie cutter thing where the dedication that is required to really teach a child is de-incentivized, because you now have this curriculum that that you can just run the people through the motions. And that's the environment of schooling that I grew up in. And it wasn't until after I finished school, after I graduated school, that I took an interest in things that requires reading, that requires researching, that requires being a student. And I like Nomo, or I'm sorry, T Mal. Was it Nomo or T Mal? T Mal. Yeah. A lot of what I know because I pursued it, not because my public school education, which was paid for by your tax dollars, by the way.
Absolutely.
What I learned on my own as a result of spending my own money on books and all the things and archives, basically dwarfs the quote unquote education I got at the expense of the taxpayer.
Absolutely. My mom went to school. She didn't graduate from high school, so she went back to school. And the college here, the university rather, said, listen, you're up in age. We're not going to make you go through this whole hassle of getting your transcripts. If you can pass the test to get in, you can just get in. And she went and she got her degree to be a social worker. But the cool thing was, because she knows that I love to research. I love to dig and plod through stuff. And take notes, and because that's how I learned. She said, "Listen, can you help me do my paper?" So I helped her do her dissertation. So here I am, a person who didn't graduate high school, helping my mother who didn't graduate high school, who's going to college, and behind the scenes, I'm helping her do her paper. So you can't allow, education to be defined, for you. To your point, when you said you were more interested in, the social workings, that happened within and without school, and a teacher who would have looked at you would have said that, you weren't capable of learning. Right. If they would have looked at that, but they maybe wouldn't have understood that you probably were a person that dealt better with manipulatives. You needed interactive, immersive learning, and so they would have just given up and not, because they're not paid to really care how you learn.
Right.
My youngest child needs manipulative. She needs things to touch and to move around, and she needs interaction. She doesn't do well with just, instruction verbally. So once I learned that about her, I actually taught her groupings by just putting the silverware in the dishwasher. I promise it wasn't child labor. Don't leave comments. So all of us learn differently.
Yeah, Ebony, it was great having you.
Thanks, Chad. Same. Thanks
also good having Keisha. I think this was a good conversation. I do want to pick back up on it next week if you are available.
Of course. Need you even ask? I'm there.
Because there's a lot more from that Marva Collins documentary, and for me, it's not so much about lionizing Marva Collins. I'm not into man worship, as all of you know. It's more or less to look at what she did in the face of this monopolized public school system. I think that we can take examples of that, not in the name of Marva Collins, but in the name of doing what's right for our children. As Ebony said, these aren't our children. These are God's children, and we are called to be stewards of his children. That's the way I see it. And again, I'm more into discipleship than I am in education. Education, I don't think, is a bad word in itself. I do think it has, however, been bastardized and perverted to be synonymous with this mass compulsory, public school system. And it's that which I reject. Ebony, I'll give you the last word.
No, I just want to say thank you. I mean, people have their heroes and their celebrities. I consider you and Keisha and Blanche and all of you guys, people that should be celebrated, because you're giving a platform and a voice, to ideologies that don't really get the microphone. So hats off to you guys for having these discussions. I get, I can't even explain. I probably have said it many times, but I get so excited when I know that I'm going to have discussions with you guys. I love these topics. They're not had often enough. So hats off to you, Chad, for hosting these kind of spaces. And thanks for even, giving me the honor of coming on with you.
Well, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate your insight and your wisdom. I think that's needed. And I want to promote people who I'm a fan of. So that's why you're here. God bless you all. Love y'all. See y'all next time.